Hello everyone, my name is Liz. Welcome back to my channel. We're gonna start with a not freshly made face. I brought my makeup, some of my makeup at least. We're gonna do a get ready with me while I answer questions that people have asked me about what it's like being adopted, growing up in a cult group, and more. Most of the questions though are specifically related to my latest adoption storytime video where I shared the story of how I was adopted. I already put on my color corrector, which several people have asked me about my color corrector in a recent video, so I just want to throw it out there. It's Revolution Beauty's color corrector. I use it every day. Even when I'm not doing my makeup for the day, I still put it on because it helps. My face is always red because I'm a redhead, so I just have a red skin tone because I'm a redhead. Anyway, worked really hard to collect questions for my worked really hard. It's not that hard labor, but I have tried to gather all the questions that I spotted that I felt comfortable answering on my last YouTube video about being adopted and sort them here. And I think there's like 17, 18 questions. So I will chapter this video. If you want to skip ahead to a certain question that you asked or you're curious about, the chapters are in the timeline of the video and they're listed below. So feel free to not watch the whole video because I don't know, would I watch a whole video about somebody answering questions about being adopted? I don't know. I don't understand. Sometimes I feel extremely lucky that I can create content on the internet and some people feel free, people actually watch it. Like, what is my life? Someone commented, "What a powerful story. You are incredibly strong, brave, and wise." Thank you very much. That is very kind. I'm just reading these questions verbatim, so I know some of them say very nice things about me. I appreciate the things that are said. I just want to say that. Okay. How did you manage to do so well in school despite all of the abuse and challenges? That is an amazing question. Everybody responds differently to trauma, and you should never judge someone's success or failures because you don't know what they are going through. For example, if I was homeless and using substances to survive, that would be a perfectly reasonable response to the trauma that I went through. But for me, I have ADHD and I have hyperfocus, and I could see that a lot of my family struggled with substance abuse and poverty, and I just was really bothered by that as a kid. I was like, these people suck. That's really mean. But as a child, I did not have the empathy that I have hopefully, I think, developed as an adult. And as a child, I was just really embarrassed to have family who was not thriving, and I was not very kind mentally to those people and very much wanted to do well to spite them, to say y'all suck, so I'm not going to. And I think because I have ADHD, I was able to use my hyper focus to just really tune out the rest of the world and focus on things that I wanted to accomplish, which really meant going to college. To my knowledge, I am the first in my biological family to go to secondary education. Most of my biological cousins joined the military if they left the small rural town in North Carolina where I grew up. I don't know of any of them that went to college, which is kind of sad. Maybe my second generation cousins went to school, but I don't know about any of my first cousins. I did have I'm just like thinking through, I'm just thinking through. Now, just because I was able to use hyperfocus and my ambition, because I was a very ambitious little girl, to accomplish that, doesn't make me better than my siblings who weren't, who struggle with substance abuse or have struggled to escape poverty, because poverty is, as the saying goes, like it's a wolf at the door. And that is something I've seen in my family's life. Like, people respond to trauma differently, and I responded to trauma by saying, all of y'all are living the worst life I could ever imagine living, and I am super stubborn and I'm not going to let myself fail. I'm going to show all of you that despite the abuse and the wretched things you used to say to me and telling me that I was going to live a failure and never succeed and be just like my biological father, who was a drug dealer, and he was in prison. And certain points in my childhood, like, I was told like multiple times by relatives, like, you'll never be better than him. And I was like, joke's on you. I'm going to college. And I was very much like that. Like, from a very early age, I understood that none of my family had gone to secondary education, that none of them had jobs outside of the military. Most of my biological family only had a career because they joined the military. Nothing against joining the military, but I knew that I did not want, I was like, I can't do push-ups. I'm not doing that. And I have several cousins in the military, and I think they're amazing people. They're amazing people. It is a pathway out of poverty for many, many communities, including my biological family. And but I was like, I'm not gonna do that. And I think I was like 15 or so when I met one of my cousins who had joined the Marines, and she got pregnant in the Marine Corps and was really struggling. And I just thought, you know, I could join the Marines like my cousin, but I really want to go to college. And I just like hyper focused on people that I admired who escaped poverty, and reading about them and wanting to be them really motivated me to not think that I would be ever held down by the circumstances was around myself. Even when I joined, even though my adoptive family was in a community that discouraged women from secondary education and encouraged women to get married and be stay-at-home wives and moms, I was like, I'm not going to be that, because I'm going to be better than everybody around me, which is kind of mean to think about, and I hope I don't carry that attitude with me. I have been accused by people in the past. They're like, oh, you think you're better than me. I don't think I'm better than anyone. I just want to be the best version of myself that I can be, and not be held down by stereotypes and other things that are often, you know, attributed to people who come from backgrounds that I come from. Kind of crazy. The get ready portion of this video barely lasted one question. I still have to do my mascara. So second question, thank you for telling your story. A question I have is, were you allowed to or encouraged to talk to your adoptive parents about your past and trauma you experienced? And if so, how did they help you process what happened? If you were not encouraged, how did you feel about that? I was encouraged to talk about my trauma. I don't know how else to say this. I think my parents were very careful. They took me to a therapist shortly after I was adopted, and I think the therapist, you know, talked a lot to me, but I don't really remember those therapy sessions necessarily. The number one takeaway from that therapy sessions was the therapist said they should get me a dog, and they got me a dog, and that helped me emotionally attach to something. I had reactive attachment disorder. I did not emotionally attach very well to my adoptive parents, and having a dog helped me, like, for the first time form like an emotional connection with someone, with something. When I was 14 or so, we watched a movie, and it was a Christian movie about bitterness, and my parents asked me after the movie, they said, Elizabeth, do you think you're bitter? And I was very nonchalant. I was like, no, I'm not bitter. And my dad said, really? And kind of pushed me a little bit, which at the time was really hard, but ended up being a very good discussion, because I opened up to them a lot about the abuse that I had gone through at the previous home I'd lived in, and that was the first time that my parents really understood to the depth of the abuse I'd gone through. It wasn't until I was an adult, though, in college, that I was watching the Christine Blasey Ford, Brett Kavanaugh discussions, and I referred to myself as a victim of sexual assault, and my mom said, what? She didn't mean it in a bad way. She was just like, what? And I said, yeah, it's been really difficult to see all this political discussion as a victim of sexual assault. And my mom said, I don't understand, when were you sexually assaulted? I was like, Mother, I told you this when I was 14. And she said, oh, she said, I thought your cousin was just experimenting, and I thought it was just, I didn't consider that sexual assault. And I said, no, that was sexual assault. So while my parents didn't discourage me from ever sharing what had happened at the previous homes, they were very uneducated about how to handle it. And I think I thought that they understood things that had clearly happened, that I thought I had expressed, and I think to some degree my mom heard what she wanted to hear, because it can be hard to really grasp the extent of abuse that your child has gone through, and you don't really want to accept it, perhaps. And I think to a degree that definitely happened when it came to my experience with sexual assault, and not having growing up in being homeschooled in the Institute in Basic Life Principles cult that my parents were in. It was very hard for them, because they didn't teach sex education, and they were not, the cult group didn't really provide those resources for victims of sexual trauma to come forward and be able to share that story and have the correct response. So while I was never discouraged from speaking about my experience, I don't think my parents were equipped to handle it in a way that could lead to long-term healing, and I kind of had to seek out that healing on my own as an adult. several people commented this, and I think I just like put a compilation of questions together, but several people said something to the effect of, what an incredible story, you should write a memoir, or have you considered writing a memoir, like where's your memoir? One of my favorite memoirs is Know My Name by Chanel Miller, and I find my feelings and experiences mirrored a lot in her story. And I think reading that memoir, I was like, I don't need to write anything. Chanel wrote everything there I could ever feel in such a way that I think her memoir really just like spoke to my experience of like surviving trauma. And I know like it's different kinds of trauma, but Know My Name is like the best memoir I've ever read, and I highly recommend. Will I write a memoir about adoption, cults? I don't know. Like it's like I want, if I was to ever write something, I want it to be able to not just be like, oh, here's all the bad things that happened, but actually provide hope and healing as you're reading it, in the way that I experienced reading Chanel Miller's memoir. So yeah, that is my thoughts on that, and I'm not sure if I am equipped to do that. Maybe one day, maybe, but probably not. We'll see. If you're up to talking about it, I would love to see a video going more in depth on your experience with RAD, or Reactive Attachment Disorder. Does this condition still affect your adult life? Reactive attachment disorder, I believe, will always impact me. Reactive attachment disorder goes hand in hand with my ADHD. It often mimics very similar side effects that would be commonly ascribed to autism, but autism is, I believe, neurogenetic condition, like you're born with it, whereas reactive attachment disorder is not something you're born with. It's something that is developed through trauma, but has very similar symptoms to autism. And that means I'm really good at masking when I experience like severe rejection dysmorphia, and so like the inability to understand social cues, and feeling like emotionally disconnected from people around me, and other like severe RAD symptoms. I do experience them as an adult. It is something that I think will always rear its head when I am around situations or emotional moments that trigger similar trauma to what, you know, not as deep trauma as what I experienced as a child, but moments that make me question my place in the world and in like hierarchy of like, you know, like your relationship to those around you is a hierarchy of sorts, whether you're at a job or a social setting or in a family relationship. And when you don't know your place in the world, sometimes I feel myself experiencing the same kinds of symptoms that I experienced as a child with RAD, where I shut down emotionally or experience extreme anxiety. And when I was a kid, I could dissociate. I could dissociate from the anxiety completely and just shut myself out from it. As an adult, I think it is a sign of healing that I don't dissociate. There are moments I wish I could dissociate and turn off my anxiety, but I still experience like emotional instability that leads to this reactive attack. What is it? Rejection sensitivity. That's the word I'm looking for. Rejection sensitivity is like the biggest trigger for me in my reactive attachment disorder as an adult. The question is, why in the world didn't social services take you sooner? They should have known there was something up. That's the question I will ask the rest of my life. Why didn't the teachers who I confided in 3rd grade, I told the teacher I was being abused by my cousin. Why didn't she actually do something? I don't know. Why didn't North Carolina CPS do something sooner? I don't know. Like, I will never know. I can't answer for them. But it is a question I will have for the rest of my life, because it was pretty clear that me and my 2 siblings were being abused in the homes we were living in. Did your adoptive parents practice physical discipline being in the Institute and Basic Life Principles? Yes. Spare the rod, spoil the child was a mantra that my parents lived by. I was spanked until I hit puberty by my dad. Like, my dad spanked me until I hit puberty. And then my mom started spanking me, and she used to spank my bottom and then, or my backside. And then she actually said somewhere in the proverb said something about being beaten with a rod will like make a child wise. So she actually started spanking me on my back, like my back, because she said like your backside is for like where you spank little kids, so I'm gonna spank your back. I did not like that. I remember screaming when she would spank me, not because it hurt, it did hurt, but more of just like the pure anger of being 17 or 18 years old and being beaten by your mother. It's just like, it just made me angry. And I don't know necessarily why it made me angry, but I just felt like I was being wronged, like disrespected as a human by my adoptive mother in that moment. So yeah, but that was the way they interpreted the Bible, and they were backed up by Bill Gothard and the cult group they were in. My question is, are you still in contact with your sisters? Have you done any group or family therapy with them? Family therapy? Hell no. I'm not doing therapy with my siblings. I don't think, do you do therapy with your adult siblings after you've grown up and moved away from home? That sounds traumatizing. And if you do, I feel bad for you, because nobody should be dragged back home to do therapy with their grown-ass siblings. I'm sorry, that's like my genuine reaction to that question. I am in contact with one sibling. One sibling I am not in contact with because they are not emotionally safe or physically safe for me to be in contact with. I used to say I could never move back to my hometown because I was just afraid they would murder me. I don't know if they would or not, but I used to be genuinely afraid of being killed in the middle of the night by that sibling. When you ask if I was also just like laughing to myself a little bit, like when you asked, have you done family or group therapy? I'm thinking of the Succession family therapy scene. Like, who do people actually do therapy with their grown siblings outside of Succession and the Murdoch clan? I don't know. I'm content to be in contact with one sibling. We have tense moments and arguments. I wrote about that some on my Substack, and like the emotional hardship of being in contact with a sibling who resents you because you're not in poverty, perhaps. I wrote about that a little bit on my Substack. I have that linked below. This theme is repeated often whenever I talk about my childhood. Your great aunt is still alive. She should be prosecuted and put in jail. Not necessarily a question, but a point I want to talk about. I have considered, especially in college, after Brett Kavanaugh's hearings. The Brett Kavanaugh, Christine Blasey Ford hearings really shaped my perception of the judicial process. I was in class, in a law class at the time, and I went home to my dorm room and Googled, like, how do I press charges against someone who abused me when I was a kid in Texas? And I learned, like, I would need to file it. I could file it in the jurisdiction where I lived. And maybe this is all a misunderstanding. Maybe I misunderstood this. I also learned the best course of action would be to like go to San Antonio and file it in that jurisdiction where the abuse happened. And that there is no like statute of limitations because I was a child, so therefore anytime I filed I would be great. And I thought about doing it. I really did. But I was like, who is this gonna hurt worse? My great aunt, who, yeah, she could go to jail, but who would this really harm? It would be me, because my story would be questioned and repeated and ridiculed, and my great aunt truly is a very traumatizing person. And the idea of being in a courtroom with her and testifying against her with her in the courtroom, I was like, I can't. I'm watching Christine Blasey Ford be questioned in every moment of her story, ridiculed and held up to, and of course my great aunt is not being nominated for the Supreme Court, but I was just like, what purpose does this serve? Sure, I could get some sort of justice, I suppose. Like, would I feel justice had been done if the woman ended up in jail for the rest of her life? What I don't even think about her in that way. I don't think, oh, I wish she was in jail. She has no ability to harm any other children at this point. Like, my siblings and I are all grown. No children are in her custody, so she's not causing harm currently. What about my cousin who assaulted me? Would it be my fault if he went out and assaulted other people? Would I then be to blame because I never spoke up against him? And I realized, no, I would not be to blame. That lies on his mother protecting him and himself for those actions. Like, he is responsible for those actions. And I was a child when this happened, and therefore it is not my responsibility to make sure that he's held accountable, because I was a literal child who told all of the adults around her this was going on. And at this time I confronted my dad. I said, why didn't you ever press charges against him or file a police report? And he said, well, I thought the best thing for you for healing was to put it behind you. And I thought it would, as a 12 or 13-year-old girl, you would be further traumatized to have to spend time at a police station and in court documenting your story to someone who clearly frightened you. The very mention of his name, you would get afraid of him, and you would be anxious and scared of your aunt in conversation. And I remember like listening to and I do think my dad should have filed a police report, but I can see it from his perspective. Like, I was no longer in that home, I was no longer at risk of being assaulted. And at that moment I realized this was the adults in my life who made that choice not to file charges. And at what point does this do anything for my future? This is just dragging me back into my past. And would a jury even side with me? Like, it's my word against theirs. And I was like, I don't feel like that. That seems more trauma than it's worth. It would feel like reliving my childhood trauma to go to court and have to testify with that woman in the room and my cousin in the room and whoever else. And it was just something like, I just want to move on and live my life. And I talk about it online, but I feel like sharing online is not re-traumatizing me in the way that having to go to court and convince a jury that all of this happened. And also having to deal with that woman again. I don't want to ever have to deal with her again. And maybe that's entirely selfish, but sometimes I think we're allowed to have little selfish moments. I always find these comments amusing, or questions kind of amusing. Someone says, it's crazy that a couple involved with IBLP were better as parents in the situation you were in. I haven't seen your other stuff yet, and I'm not done with your video, but I'm wondering if they're still in IBLP. Maybe I missed a detail, but I'm just curious. Also, I think YouTube flagged my other comment. I'm not sure if YouTube flagged your other comment, but I do get asked this quite a bit. Are your parents still in IBLP? Whew. Are your parents still in IBLP? This is a question I see commonly throughout my YouTube channel and TikTok and other social media. So if you're in the Institute in Basic Life Principles, once your children are no longer living at home, you're not allowed to re-enroll. You're not allowed to be part of IBLP if you're not currently raising children. I think they might have like an alumni association, but the Institute in Basic Life Principles was only for families. Once you're no longer have children at home, you're no longer really welcome in the group, and you really shouldn't enroll in the group. So while my parents no longer are enrolled in the Institute in Basic Life Principles because they no longer have children at home, they still believe that Bill Gothard was right about everything. My dad will still say Bill Gothard was touched by the Lord, that the Lord spoke through Bill Gothard, that God used Bill Gothard, that he still believes in the principles of IBLP, which is really hard for me. And I don't think I will ever be able to convince them that the entire life that they've lived was in service to a lie and a cult leader. And I think that is always going to be a source of grief for me personally. Someone asked, what year was your biological mother born and where did the mother occur? I can try to find something. I don't know. I don't know what year my biological mother was born. I don't know how to find the information either. Can't find it. I don't know. Someone said, you should first and last name your aunt so the internet can do its thing. She deserves it. She does deserve it, but do I want to deal with the grief of my biological great aunt? No, I don't. I actually still know her grandchildren are my second cousins, and I'm in contact with them. They don't deserve any. They are innocent. They don't deserve any flashback. What's the word? They don't deserve any internet trauma because their great aunt is an evil person. That's why I don't speak of her name, because I don't want the innocent people in her life to get caught up in anything negative. As an adult adoptee, what are your general feelings on ongoing adoption? Do you feel like there is a difference between your opinion of domestic versus international adoption? I feel like we as a society tend to focus on adoptees as children and brush aside adult experiences. I 100% agree. My opinion on adoption, it is always in service of the child. And too many people view adoption as a vehicle to become a parent instead of a vehicle to provide a child with a family. And I think we should reframe adoption within that context and adoptees first. Adoption is not a tool to be used for someone to become emotionally fulfilled because they're unable to have children or they want more children. And too often people view adoption as a way to buy their way into parenthood. And I feel bad if you can't have kids. I genuinely am grieving for you if you've been unable to have children. But you have to put aside your own desires and put the needs of a child first, whether or not you're a foster parent who allows a child into your home for a short period of time until they can be reunited with their biological family, or whether or not the door opens for you to adopt a child and provide a lifelong family for that child. It's always the needs of the child over anything else, and I think we should reframe it that way. I also think international adoption is not good. Like, in general, it's not good. I think uprooting a child from their culture and family ties to bring them to another country where they have no cultural ties or long-lasting family ties is harmful. I only speak as a domestic adoptee, but losing access to your biological family, as rough as they are, is extremely hard. Not knowing the names of my great aunts who she married, whether my uncles and aunts are dead, whether my cousins are alive, like, that is always something that I will have, like, at the back of my mind. Like, the last time I saw my cousin who joined the Marines, I was 15, and I don't even know her last name. It is hard to explain, but losing that family connection is something that you will feel the rest of your life, and at least domestically, it can be easier to find it. Whereas in international adoption, once you've lost your language and culture, it's very difficult to regain it, and I think that should give us, like, pause in our pursuit of international adoptions. I think we should do everything we can to support children in their home countries, whether that's donating time, effort, money, whatever it is, into a developing country that perhaps has a need for outside resources in that community. But I think we should allow communities to foster and connect with their own children in need of families, rather than coming in and taking those children from that community entirely. I understand that's an unpopular opinion, and I understand it's controversial, but that is the way I feel. Like, I don't feel like children are a product to be bought and sold on an international market. This is the last question for now. Thank you for sharing your story. I've heard about IBLP through Cults to Consciousness, who I think you'd be a great guest on. The host of that podcast ends each episode by asking guests if they have a sassy statement for the people who wrong them, or encouragement for people in similar situations. That would be my question. Okay, number one, thanks for saying I would be a great podcast guest. I really struggle to go on a podcast. It's like my least favorite thing in the world. I don't know why. It's really, really hard for me to go on a podcast. I think it's just like telling the story from scratch to finish on a podcast is like much harder than just like sharing whatever you feel like on a video that you can edit and then post, you know? Sassy statement for people who've harmed me. I'm really bad at sassy statements for people who harm me. I've been asked something similar to this before, and this is really hard for me to come up with anything. All I can think of is the cliche, but make it true, so true. I hope you have the life you deserve. Like, that's all. I really don't want to put any energy into any other thinking of ways to be sassy to you, because I do not care about you anymore. Like, once you've harmed me, I just want to shut the door and move on and let you live the life you deserve, and my karma is, or the best karma I can think of is not caring what happens to you anymore. Encouragement for people in similar situations. I hope nobody's in a similar situation, truly. I hope nobody ever goes through anything like I went through, but I know it happens to people. Encouragement for people in similar situations. The way that you've been treated, the way you grew up, the experience that life has handed you is not the end. You are so much more than the abuse, trauma, or situations that you have been put in. And there is a community out there. There are resources out there. There is a whole wide world open to you, and when a door closes, jump through the next open window. Like, never let your past define your future. Thank you guys for watching. Thanks for asking so many wonderful questions. I hope my answers resonated or provided insight, and thanks for finding my videos on the internet, and I will see you guys next time. Let me know if there's any follow-up videos that you would like to see on my channel, whether it's more in depth about reactive attachment disorder or the IBLP cult or any other things I said that caught your curiosity. I would love to follow up on that. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys all around the internet. See ya.
We're sorry. You have have reached a number that has been disconnected or is no longer in service.